Well, this binational commission, I mean, one wonders, does it focus in any way on strengthening the private sector here in terms of improving capacity?
Absolutely. One of the working groups of the BNC is the energy and investment element to that. And so we've had a number of discussions. Last June, for example, in Washington, there was a meeting of that working group as a part of a wider BNC meeting, and a lot of involvement with private sector. There are so many investors that are interested in Nigeria. We have a large investment and business presence here, about $5 billion of U.S. investment in Nigeria. A lot of it in the oil sector, but not all of it. And there's a lot of interesting things happening. But for that investment to really come, this is an attractive market. There's a huge market. There's so much going on economically in Nigeria. But for that to come, there are some issues that need to be worked out. We also have another bilateral mechanism that's separate from the BNC, a Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, TIFA, and we have regular meetings of our TIFA Council, which focuses specifically on economic and trade issues. Okay, well, let's talk about this visa process. I know that's where many people like to hear a comment or two on. You talked about in that commission, there was a statement I came across where talking about making it easier for Nigerians with people-to-people relationships. Mm-hmm. What is that? Could you shed some light on that? Well, I mean, first of all, I do want to talk a little bit about the visa thing directly, if you don't mind, because I think the news there is very good. It's really important for us to welcome Nigerian visitors to the United States. There's so much back and forth. I think in the consulate in Lagos, so that's not for the whole mission, it's just for us here in Lagos, I think we issued something like 70,000 visas last year. Huge number of Nigerians traveling to the U.S. And it's important for us to make that as easy as possible. And we've spent a lot of money and a lot of resources. We've brought more officers in to make that process easier. And there's a great metric for that. There's a great result that's come from these efforts, and that is the amount of time that people have to wait to get a visa. And that's gone from, at the worst period, several months, to now 2-3 weeks maximum. And I gave a speech yesterday, and it was so nice. A woman stood up, and she'd been a former president of the Fulbright Association here in Nigeria, and she said, "I just want to tell you that I needed to get a visa, and I got an appointment the next day, and the officers were polite and friendly, and I got the visa right away, and I wanted to thank you for all the good work you're doing." And that's the kind of input we want to have, because facilitating travel between the two countries is one of the primary missions that we have as diplomats here.
Well, that was on the bright side. For some people, they also say, for those who have been rejected, I mean, not everyone is granted, right. They say that, the right of reply, or is it appeal? Do you have an appeal process?
We don't have an appeal process per se. Everyone always has the right to reapply if they feel like their circumstances have changed. One of the challenges for people who haven't established a record of international travel is that the U.S. law requires our officers to assume that the person is not eligible for the visa, assume that the person's intent is to immigrate to the United States, unless they demonstrate otherwise. So the needle starts on no, and it's up to the applicant to move the needle over to yes. And I think some people sort of assume that it's an innocent until proven guilty system, but actually it's sort of the other way around, and that's a requirement under our law.
Do you see the gap? I mean, the gap is as much as 6 months when you can reapply if you've been rejected. Do you see that gap being, being maybe reduced?
Well, operating on the assumption that the officer has made the best possible determination that they can at the time of the interview, and I think everyone who's applied for a U.S. visa, whether they've gotten a visa or not gotten a visa, knows that the interview is very short, and that's a function of the huge demand that we have for our visas. But in that short period of time, the officer is going to look at a number of factors: the person's ties to the United States and to Nigeria, the person's income level, the person's previous travel, things like that. If that person hasn't been able to move that needle to yes, the assumption that we have is it would probably be a waste of time for that person to come back the next day and present exactly the same circumstances and hope to get a visa. So generally like to see a little time between when someone's refused and when they come back. And so that gives them some time to demonstrate that things have changed.
Well, we'll talk about this. What about education, especially students who would want to go into the United States for studies? How easy has it been for them?
Well, that's really a good question. There are more Nigerians studying in the United States than there are from any other country on the continent. Really? There are 7,000 Nigerians studying in the U.S.
Not even from China?
No, from the continent.
Okay. Africa.
Although I have no statistics, but I would guess that there's probably more Nigerian students in America than Chinese students, but that's just a guess. And that's another really strong commitment for us, because not only is education a sort of service export, I mean, when Nigerians come and pay for schools, that's good for the U.S. economy. It's also a way of building the bridges and the ties that we've talked about. All those Nigerian students, they come back to Nigeria. They have these long-standing relationships with the United States. There's a real sort of real integration between the two countries that comes from education. One of the things that we do in the consulate in particular to help facilitate that is we have an advising service, and it's absolutely free. And young Nigerian students are welcome to come in and talk to our advisors. They'll help them figure out how to pass the standardized tests like the SAT or the GRE. They'll help them choose a good school that's right for them. They'll help them look at financial assistance, because we have lots of financial assistance in the United States, and not just from the state, but from private organizations, from NGOs. And so that's a really great resource for Nigerians that want to study in the U.S. And then we have a number of wonderful exchange programs too, like the Fulbright program, where we bring scholars from the United States to learn about Nigeria, and scholars from Nigeria to the United States to learn about America.
Security now. What kind of conversation is going on in the Commission in terms of what needs to be done and how it needs to be addressed by both parties?
Right. Well, this upcoming meeting of the Binational Commission is focused specifically on regional security, and there are a lot of very serious threats out there, and we're going to look hard, particularly at what's happening in northeastern Nigeria at this time. And I just do want to say that the United States government condemns in the strongest possible terms the terrorism that we've seen in Nigeria, and are really deeply concerned by the victims, Christians and Muslims up in the north of this terrible violence, and that is totally unacceptable from our point of view. And we would never in a million years sort of call into question a state's right to defend itself from that sort of terrorist threat. It's part of national sovereignty. That said, I think there are things that we can offer our Nigerian partners. We've certainly had a lot of experience with counterinsurgency and those sorts of issues over the last 10 years, and I think there's some lessons that we've learned, sometimes painfully, that we could share with our Nigerian partners. I think we're also interested in sharing our point of view, which is that there's a security issue that needs to be addressed immediately, but there are also a number of wider issues up in the north that lead to that insecurity, and our feeling is that it would be a very good idea to address that. And another thing we really want to talk about in the security piece is the importance of security forces representing the country in as correct a way as possible. In other words, security forces, police, military, they need to respect the rights of Nigerian citizens. If they don't do that, not only is that the wrong thing, but it's also bad counterinsurgency, and it's likely to lose the very Nigerian citizens that the government is trying to win over and bring back into the fold.
Okay, let's take a comment or two from Twitter, from those who are watching. Egwando Tane has this one. He says, which Nigerian delicacy do you enjoy most?
Well, I'm a suyo fan, so...
How do you cope with the pepper in that?
I don't mind so much. I've spent a lot of time in places like India and Pakistan, so I'm okay with spice. And okay. I come from California, and we eat a lot of Mexican food in California, and that can be pretty spicy too.
Just quickly, U.S. President was here, and he had a grand plan for the youth, talking about spending so much money in terms of a new exchange program, and a host of people were wondering, when is that going to start?
The new exchange program.
Is it a new exchange program,
right,
or is it?
I think we're talking about the African youth program.
Yeah.
It's tremendous, and we mentioned that yesterday in the speech. The idea is to bring 500 African young people to the United States, and they get a lot of high-level attention when they come. I think previous groups have actually gone and met with President Obama. There'll be intensive exchange on an academic level, and then I think a lot of partnership and follow-up after they come back, and internships. It's a really exciting program.
500 each year, or?
I think the idea is for 500 each year. There's still some defining that needs to be going on, and we'll have information about that shortly.
Okay.
All right. Do we expect President Obama in the country before his tenure lapses?
Well, I can't say that I'm aware of any immediate plans for the president to come. What I can say is that President Obama, Secretary Kerry, all of the rest of us involved in diplomacy recognize the importance of Nigeria, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see the president come here at some point before he leaves office.
All right, and Jeffrey Hawkins is the U.S. Consul General. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much.